Welcome to Culture Connect. This evening we have two special guests who are working on a feature animated film, and I'd like to introduce Dee Hibbert-Jones and Nomi Talisman.
I'm Nomi Talisman, originally from Israel. I moved here about 12 years ago. My background is in photography. I moved into video film animation. And we are going to talk about, we're going to show Living Condition. It's a cross-platform animated documentary that tells the story of people who have or had a family member in death row.
I was born in England, and I moved here about 20 odd years ago. I always say it's 20 years, it's a bit more than that now. And I began as a sculptor and public artist, and started looking at and interested in politics of public space. And now I teach at UC Santa Cruz in the art department. I teach digital art, new media, sculpture, and public art.
Let's take a look at the first clip of the film, and then we'll start talking about it. So go ahead and roll the first clip, please.
When they started bringing back the death penalty, I embraced it. The death penalty was fine with me as long as it was your brother, your son, or your daughter. It was okay for somebody else's family members. I supported the death penalty. Never gave a thought for the family members left behind of the executed. And then one day it came knocking on my door. And that's where my education began. Okay, I'm ready when you are. They said he was a monster. I don't see that. I see a little brother. I remember being out in the clam flats, digging clams. Matter of fact, while he was in San Quentin prison, we used to talk about clamming. When Manny was 12 years old, Manny had a car accident. He was thrown quite a few feet. From then on, he was late in school. I mean, he just couldn't, he repeated some of his grades over and over. I think about 4 grades he repeated. He could barely read or write when he got out of school. He got out of school in the 7th grade. I moved out to Sacramento in 1967, and at that time, Manny was 17 years old, and I wrote back to my mother, how's Manny doing? Manny's in Vietnam. Manny's in war. I said, what? It seems that Manny was watching the war unfold on TV, and he had already had 2 brothers who were in the Marines in front of him. So he's seen that, he says, I'm going to the Marines, I'm going into the military. So he went down to go join the Marines. He was unable to pass the test. He couldn't pass the test, so the Marines gave him the answers. He found himself at war. I called my mother on the telephone, says, Ma, where's Manny? She said, he's in Vietnam. I said, Ma, we're in Vietnam. She said, he's at this place. I'll go get his letter, I'll tell you where he's at. She spells K-H-E. She got that far, I knew it was K-San, and my heart dropped. K-San was all over the news. Ma had no idea Manny was in such a precarious situation. She'd have been terrified had she known.
A few years ago, I had a day job, and basically I was producing media for an organization that does death penalty plea work. And through that, I got to actually talk to family and community members of people who were facing capital sentencing or pretrial. And I got to talk to, basically sit behind the camera and listen to interviews where these family members talk about their experiences, they talk about their own family members, and they talk about their relative who's, who's waiting a trial. And every time after any of these interactions, I went back home and I was telling this, like, there's a story there. There's a project. And at one point we went back to the organization that I was working with, and we asked them about what they think about it, just in terms of making a piece that at the time we thought maybe 5 minutes, you know, short piece, or maybe 10 if we can stretch it, just to kind of like have these stories out there, and they were thrilled. I mean, one of the things that they said is that these are voices that usually they don't go in media, you don't hear it in mainstream media, you don't hear it even in almost nowhere. And the original thought was to use it for internal training, for advocacy, for basically these were the two, and education. These were kind of like the 2-3 main avenues. And they referred us to some people, and we interviewed, and we started working on it. And the more that we listened to the stories, we were kind of like, this is really a film. This is really a longer piece that needs to be, and stories that are very moving and painful and have to be respected, and you know, really to show the length and the arch. So we found ourselves that many years later with a feature film.
And just to say that we've been doing animated other projects, and not just animation, but art projects and collaborative video-based projects for prior to that time, about 5 or 6 years together, collaborating.
Yeah. Wow. Mm. And so why animation on this piece? Because, I mean, when I tell people about the piece and I say it's an animation, and talk about the type of animation that you're using.
Well, first, I think the reason we decided to do animation was because, well, some of the families wanted anonymity, so that was our kind of very first hit. But also we realized that the stories that were being told are so intense. There's this sensational aspect to the stories themselves and the violence of them. We wanted to not only remove you as the viewer from that kind of intense, visceral experience of the violence of it, but also pull them in at the same time with the intimacy, allowing these really close, intense kind of shots of the face, and then also these sort of surreal scenes. So we always talk about the fact that some of the scenes have this sort of sense of extended time that's like endless, and other times it's really, really fast. And you couldn't do that if you were just working where you could, but in a very different way through animation. So we hope to create this place that really creates a different kind of experience, and people can hear and see these stories in a new way.
And there's the white space. There's a lot of white in the film, or at least in Bill's stories. There's a lot of white that we hope that people can kind of use for a little bit of just observation and reflection. So that's kind of another side of it. And the type of animation, you were asking about that. All the headshots, all the interviews are lip sync, so they're done pretty much frame by frame, and they're accurate. Wow. So if you know the person, you know, and you see the drawing, you know it's them.
That was one of the things I was going to say just about the animation, that we actually started thinking about the idea of these people as superheroes, because they have committed no crime, and then they're facing this intense judgment from communities. And we just really wanted to have this other perspective on an intense subject, which there are so many kind of moral, ideological, social, political implications to, and have people consider that. So the superhero aspect was something we really thought about too.
And let's take a look at this, the second roll-in, and do you want to introduce that? That's
the dog story.
The dog story.
The dog story is yes, it's a different family. They're local in the Bay Area. That's enough to say about them. And it was actually one of the first interviews that we did. And one thing that we really liked about it is kind of like it's a little story of an incident in a neighborhood, but it rolled downhill so fast, and it kind of give you a glimpse to what it's like to live in let's say, in certain neighborhoods where things that start as a party can end up really badly.
Let's take a look.
We should look at that. Yeah.
So we had this block party, and it was everybody came from both sides, and they had this rap contest. You know, it just so happens that people from your side like you and you wasn't that good, and they were cheering, and you know, had to deal with the people who knew you couldn't rap and were booing. So it's like, oh, get them off the stage, you know, they can't do nothing, where you come from with that, you know, kind of stuff. It was a really big thing. The whole area was there. And a little guy up there, he had just got him a new puppy. And somebody from the other side wanted this little kid's puppy, and so they gonna take his dog. And James steps in and say, you know, you're not gonna get his dog. You better leave his dog alone. You know, stood up for the little guy, and somebody pulled out a gun. Everybody scattered. Kids getting run over, old ladies screaming, getting pushed down and stuff like that. And James says, well, you know, that's unreal. Let me go over and, you know, see if I can calm this stuff down. He goes over there and gets shot. So I think that's when it all, you know, all started, you know. And it was one thing after another. They started picking at him from then, you know.
You want to move to the next?
Every time that I watch that, I get chills. It's like the idea of something like the party that just happened so quickly, and then, you know, I mean, how many, I guess you know that story, but how many people were killed? Do you know, was there?
No. No,
within
actually,
that particular story,
the particular story, I think it was just one incident. But I mean, the main thing in stories like that, a lot of time is kind of like it starts, or it's a chain, you know, sort of a link in a chain of, you know, other events, and yeah.
So with James's story, one of the things we learnt was that he was stabbed when he was 11 or 12, and then shot when he was 14, and then stabbed again when he was 16, and then shot in the head when he was 18, and only the last one was intentional, the rest were accidents. And so just thinking about an environment in which you grew up in that situation really changes or alters an entirely different worldview.
And how are you developing all the characters, or how are you able to weave them in and out?
The film, they're most likely not going to be weaved. So it's going to be independent stories of, you know, 30, 20, 15 minutes, depends on the story, and we can talk about the characters so far. And the interactive platform is just going to be snippets that you can either follow character story, you can look at issues that all of them facing, let's say questionable legal representation, the role of race in even being brought to trial, lack of services in your community, or how the media is looking at the families, whether they had more or less access to begin with or not.
But also, so, you know, moral and social questions about that.
Yes.
You know, what are our responsibilities? You know, what about reconciliation?
But,
what about the victims'
right,
families?
But that's sort of more presented to the viewer than necessarily. I was just talking about the clips, and just really taking like little clips, you know, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 minutes, and kind of weave them together into sort of a wider view, and then go back to these comments. And these are kind of the questions that we hope that audience will think about or interact with.
Let's look at this short clip and then talk about the interactive element of the piece.
Okay, so
and let's roll this.
Martina. Right?
This is the last clip. Yeah.
Reporters came to us and wanted to know, were we reared in a project? Did we sell drugs? Were our parents alcoholics? Did they abuse us? Were they drug addicts? And when the answer was no, they didn't want any story about us. They didn't want to talk to us.
So basically what you have there is our three main characters from the film. And so those stories will become these discrete stories, kind of from the first shock of what happened to kind of like the unfolding of each of the stories. Each of them have a very different ending, and each of them tell a very different kind of aspect of what it's like to live with this extreme situation. And then we also have the interactive project.
Yeah, talk about that.
Well, the interactive, right now we're really lucky to be working with the Abuena Center for the Arts to work with us preparing a residency program. And we're looking at trying to bring in, basically bring in advisors on developing an interactive project that could be used in museums, but also go into educational programs and go back into communities too. And so that will take certain clips from the film. And we're working with different kind of communities.
Worked with high school kids, a re-entry program at City College in San Francisco, and also we brought it to anti-death penalty organizations, and we're bringing it back to, we're trying to get few gamers and developers and designers, kind of like, okay, you know, just listen to what the potential audience, the potential users are saying, and try to build it from that point, you know, from that point and back.
And you were Center for the Arts and other,
yes.
and BAVAC. We were Media Maker Fellows at BAVAC a couple of years ago, and so we've been working closely with BAVAC too to help us create the site, which would be something you could look at online, you could work with on a mobile app, but you could also go into a space or a place and actually engage with it as an interactive and connect to the sections of stories, respond to those stories, create your own animations, and kind of feedback into it. So we create this archive of responses. And people in different communities can start to actually hear each other's perspectives and stories on these very, very intense stories that we've got going on.
Well, I hope that you guys will submit this to the Academy Awards in the documentary. Can you, is there a documentary?
There is.
Animation?
No, there's either or. But
there's either
animation or documentary.
You still have to choose. It's like probably in a few years it might be a category.
Right.
So we've seen more work moving in that direction. But
and just really quickly before we end the show, talk about the music, because we just, can you talk briefly about the music?
Bill's story is done with I mean, to the extent that it's composed. We had the pleasure to work with Fred Frith. It did an amazing score.
And actually one of the things I think was really interesting, he decided to create a score that worked with Bill's voice as one of the instruments. So that you basically have this kind of supporting to this, what he defined as a blues kind of score to the entire kind of story of Bill. Bill's an incredibly charismatic storyteller. I just want to say, if anybody wants to learn more about these stories or hear about it, help us fundraise for the project, of course, then we'd love to you know, tell our website, which is livingcondition.net. You know, and we have little clips, we have connections and more description of what's going on and what's happening.
Oh, great. Well, this is a powerful piece, and I look forward to seeing it on the big screen.
Thanks so much for asking us about it.
And thank you, Culture Connect audience, and we look forward to seeing the film and perhaps talking with these gals again about their other projects. And good evening.